Excellent. Right, cool. So what's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the GTVR Developer Report. Once again, I want to start by thanking all of you for supporting the show with all the likes, shares across Facebook, Reddit and Twitter. For those who are new to the show, this is all about bringing you closer to VR developers, exploring some of their past within the gaming industry, some Q&A with our live studio audience of VR enthusiasts and content creators, all made possible in virtual reality thanks to Rec Room. So that brings us to our guest of the hour. Please welcome all the way from Singapore, SAIRENTO VR developer, Chalit Noonchoo.
Hey guys!
Hey!
Hello there. That was cool. I like that, guys. Good.
So, Chalit, how are you today?
Yeah, I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here.
Are you enjoying the weaponry?
Yeah, I love the whole look of this place. I love the set. I love the flying ninja over there.
yeah. It's so good. It's really good. Jimmy's definitely outdone himself on this one. So, please give us an insight into your personal gaming history and what led you into developing VR games.
Right, so I'm from Mixed Realms, and Mixed Realms is kind of a spin-off of our previous company, Swagsoft. So Swagsoft used to do mobile apps and games. We had a bit of cash on hand, and we're thinking, hey, we've always wanted to do our own IP. We've always wanted to work on our own games. So around that time, it was starting to be the rise of VR. I think Oculus was coming out with their DK1, CV1 around that period. And Vive was also announcing their HTC Vive to the market. And we saw these products and we were thinking, hey, let's do something really cool with VR. Let's make a VR game. And that essentially is how it all started.
Wow. That's pretty cool. So what was your first game in VR?
Right. I think my virgin experience would have to be Brookhaven Experiment. Do you guys know that one?
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's this for those who don't know, it's this game where it's a wave defense game. So you're standing in the middle of this area and zombies are like coming from you from all directions, and you kind of have to defend yourself with, I think, a pistol. You can sort of like upgrade your weapons later on, but it starts you off with like a pistol. And it was like a really amazing, like mind-blowing experience, seeing like the enemies coming up at you in VR for a first-timer at least. And one of the things that I felt about it was I wanted to be able to move around. I felt kind of constricted, not being able to like dodge enemies, to jump from from area to area, to kind of be locked in one place. So that's how it started from there. And the next game I played was Raw Data, which I'm sure you guys have heard of. It's also on PSVR.
Yeah. LSP. Brilliant.
Yeah, so it was a really amazing experience. I love it. And that's kind of how we kind of got like the Cyber Ninja kind of inspiration from it. For me, the thing about Raw Data was that I felt that I wanted more build versatility out of it. I just didn't want to choose between being a ninja or being a guy who had two guns or a guy with a bow and arrow. I wanted to be like all three at once. So that's how it all came together.
Yeah, you do.
Yeah.
Of course you do.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. And that's fantastic that you brought up Raw Data, because a lot of people, when they're looking forward to your game because they've played Raw Data, and probably for that same reason, the fact that you've chucked all three elements of what's really cool about Raw Data into one player. So, yeah, that's really good. So, Chalit, try and describe SAIRENTO VR to someone who's never played it before.
Okay. SAIRENTO VR is, I would, in a nutshell, I would call it a loot-based action shooter. So you kind of play the role of a ninja called Cheiko Hatsuri. So she's a member of this organization called the Silent Ones. So the Silent Ones are kind of like a group that has been around since ancient times in Japan. And they are a group of people who have mastered like the arts of ninjutsu and all the good stuff. And their role is to protect humanity in general. So they're kind of like a covert organization, and they've kind of like been around up to like the current era, which is kind of like a futuristic 2060-ish kind of timeline. So part of the game is that there's this like conspiracy going on, and you kind of like embroiled in the middle of it. yeah, so that's kind of like the game in a nutshell.
That sounds incredible. So let's talk about the challenges that bring Sorento VR to each of the major VR headsets, because as of this moment, Sorento VR is now available on Oculus Rift, HTC Vive, and it's coming soon to PlayStation VR.
Okay, so we kind of started off with the HTC Vive. So we're kind of used to the whole control scheme on the Vive controllers. So the next platform after that was the Oculus Rift. And one of the issues we had was having the differing control schemes kind of conflicting with each other. Like, for example, the Oculus Touch controllers, they kind of recommend having a hold-to-grip mechanic, whereas for the Vive controllers, it's more of a click-to-grip. So so one of the challenges we had was like having all these different control schemes that we had to support, and having it make sense for players to be able to choose which ones they wanted to choose. And then now moving on to PSVR, one of the extra challenges, of course, is how strict Sony is in general with the comfort options. So, for example, as you know, Sairento is quite a physically active game, right? You have to sort of like crouch, you have to jump, you have to do all sorts of fancy physical activities. So one of the limitations of PSVR is that we can't really like get users to do all these things. For example, they recommend us to not get users to actually crouch, because when you play PSVR, you're kind of seated on a couch, right? So there are all these like considerations to make, and that kind of it's another layer of challenge for us, trying to get this control mechanics to feel consistent with the experience that we want to deliver, but also to get through their consultation process.
Yeah. So how have you found Sony's Q&A process?
It's actually a very in-depth process, which is great, by the way. So how it is for us in our experience is that we submit a build, and then they have their testers go through every edge case, and they have a whole folder of screenshots and videos detailing what needs to be changed. So, for example, if you're talking about comfort options, they one of the things that they want us to do is to be able to sort of reduce the field of view when players do anything funky like somersaulting or turning around in their play area. So I find that they kind of want the best experience for their players, and that means going through all these hoops to ensure that the game contains all these different comfort options.
Yeah, that's the important thing is having those options, because as we all know, your game might be the first experience for someone in VR, and you don't want them to feel sick. So yeah, that's spot on. Right. So, but apart from that, you've actually you've enjoyed the Q&A.
I wouldn't say we enjoy the Q&A, but yeah. But actually, I would say that for a game like Sairento, as there's a lot of different movement options involved in the game, it kind of makes it harder for us to bring the game to a state that we would like it to be. For example, I think we are one of the few games on the market where we let players go, all sorts of crazy with the movement options. One case in point, one of it is the somersaulting mechanic that we have. So how that works is when you jump up in the air and you raise both hands in the air, you kind of do a somersault, like a 360-degree somersault in the air. And so that you can imagine that kind of doesn't sit well with Sony, seeing as to how it's not a very friendly experience for players in VR. Yeah. So even for us back on the PC builds, we kind of segregate a lot of all these different locomotion options into toggles. So you could turn off the ability to somersault, you could turn off the ability to slide on the ground, you could turn off the ability to teleport and to move around and just teleport. And there are all sorts of other options like this that we have to kind of port over in a way that is okay for Sony. So for another example is one of our mechanics is crouching to slide. So what that means is when you do a jump, you kind of have to physically crouch on the ground to tell the game that you want to do a slide on the ground after you land. And so what Sony wants us to do instead is to kind of like bind it to a button instead, because they don't want players to sort of like physically crouch.
Can we turn it on and off?
Yeah, right now we are exploring like several options, and we want to see what we can get by, what they would actually approve. So binding it to one of the buttons on the Move controller is actually one of the things that we're trying. But of course, as we are still in the middle of the consultation process, we are trying to find ways to actually let this be the default experience. Like we have a vision of what we want the default experience to be, but we just need to make sure that that kind of like falls in line with what Sony wants of the game.
Don't get me wrong, I get having the options for people to play seated. A lot of my streams I do seated, first of all, because we have a lot of people on PlayStation VR who are disabled. So I always get a lot of questions, can this be played seated? So I tend to default to playing seated. So I understand that Sony are possibly saying to you, you know, you can't really put that mechanic in because most of our players are seated. But as far as I'm concerned, a lot of people I know play standing. So...
yeah.
Actually, that's a really great point. In terms of playing seated, like even for PC VR, we do know of players who play seated, and even for us as developers, when sometimes we get lazy and we just like sit down to test the game, and really the only thing that we have to do is really to bob our head down lower to trigger the crouch. So, I mean, to us, it's not really a big deal that you have to, bend over and do this or something. But I think it's more of adhering to what Sony requires of us.
They want to hit that wider audience. So what we're going to do now is we're going to pass you over to our amazing group of VR enthusiasts. We're going to start with my man Taz. You got this, Taz? You ready?
Yeah, thank you, GT. Hello, Chalit. My name's Taz.
Hey.
I'm from Gaming off YouTube, and we represent the New Zealand audience. I do, so there's not many of us. Now I've got a question for you. I've been doing a bit of research this morning and last night when I got home from work, and I want to know if you can tell us more about the ideas behind the implementation of the third-person camera that you've implemented and how it can be utilised in the game. I really want to look at showing off a move, especially with doing the backflip and then, like you say, the somersaults coming down into a slide and slicing someone's head off. If you could talk to us a bit more about that, please.
Right. Okay. So regarding the third-person camera, it's something that we haven't ported over to PlayStation due to the increased graphical demand on it. It's essentially rendering another, view of the game. So we're trying to get that to work, but no promises there. So to answer your question, what we intend for the third-person camera is really a way for players to show to other players how their action would actually look from a third person. So we kind of want players to be the action star of their own movie. It's essentially giving them the tool to be that. So essentially, when you strike a cool pose in game, when you slash an enemy, when you do a somersault, that kind of translates into the camera motion on the screen as well for other players to watch. So if you're actually recording your own gameplay, you can kind of like, do some really cool sequence of moves, and share that with your friends. Yeah, so part of that is also the slow motion, like you mentioned. We really want that to tie into the whole movie action star kind of feel that you get.
Cool.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Awesome. Hey, thank you very much, Chalit. Thank you.
That's a fantastic question, Taz. Thank you.
Well, greetings, sir.
Hey.
Many want to know that the word SAIRENTO is a borrowed word from English, silent. But the trailer of the game looks anything but silent. There's shooting and slashing, shooting, just constant action all the time. Is there any stealth at all?
So we kind of have a very limited stealth experience. So what I mean is that when you kind of enter a level, enemies aren't aware of you being there. So you can kind of be sneaky, you can kind of sneak behind them, take them out with a melee weapon. So melee weapon kills are silent, so and as well as projectile weapons like throwing, like shurikens, kunais, the bow and arrow. So you can kind of like utilize these weapons to take them out silently. And for some of these weapons, there's also this thing called relics. So relics are ways that you can upgrade your weapon. So one of the functions of these relics is one of them can actually turn your weapon into a silent weapon. So it kind of acts as a silencer. So you can use these weapons to take enemies out silently as well. So, but once like an enemy sees you or spots you in the distance, all bets are off, and sort of like an area-wide alarm rings, and they'll all be aware of your location.
Thank you very much.
Brilliant question. Oh, boys, we're not going to get from one side to the other without dropping it.
It will be me that drops.
It'd be amazing.
Hi, it's Paul from the VR Realm. I'm
Hey.
very interested in like immersion and controls in the games, being from the PC VR side as well. Was there any issues with obviously the limited tracking on the PlayStation? How did you get around that? Like obviously because seeing it on the PC, there's a lot of turning around and a lot of paying attention that way. And it's good to be able to do that freely.
Yeah, that's a great question. So as you brought up, the tracking space for PlayStation is a lot smaller, and typically for PlayStation users, you're playing from a couch. So that does give us some difficulties in terms of the gameplay. For Sairento, there's a lot of physical movement involved. There's a lot of turning around on the spot to kind of like see like enemies coming from different directions, or like twisting and dodging bullets as they come towards you. So this is definitely one of the concerns that we had of porting the game over to the PlayStation. So to this end, we have included several control options. We have options to let you rotate left and right on the spot at 45-degree intervals, 90-degree intervals, or free rotation. So this is meant to address the inability of the player to just turn on the spot. We also offer other comfort options, such as, which are pretty typical actually, which is like a touchpad locomotion for them to be able to walk around. And we can also vary the speeds at which you can walk. So you can turn your walking speed into kind of like a running speed. And in addition to all this, there is our locomotion system on top of it, which is being able to jump to get around to certain places. So we kind of think that this all put together, we're trying to conserve that experience that you had on the PC VR, and try not to make too many concessions bringing it over to the PlayStation.
SasketchUp VR for SasketchUp VR on YouTube. Hi, I've also been just actually playing your game just before this stream, so that's really cool, or before this interview. One of the things I've noticed is you've done a lot of iterations of hardware, because you've been there since the start of VR, like you said, with the DK1. You've actually got a lot more of other innovative VR hardware, like the haptics, and the upcoming
3D rudder?
3D rudder.
And things like that coming in, which of course for the PSVR, 3D rudder is going to be, I think, one of those things that this game really matches well with. How's that been for you to develop with the hardware and adding so much like haptics and new hardware into the game? How do you feel VR is developing that way?
That's a really interesting question. We feel, from our experience working with all these haptic devices, we do feel like it does add quite a different dimension to the game. Because when you think about like dodging bullets, you don't think about like getting hit. So when you do get hit, what is the kind of feedback that we can give the player? So right now, other than just like displaying a red tinted image on your view on your view, right? There's not much beyond that, and like throwing out a damage number, showing your health bar decreasing. So being able to feel like bullets hitting you at various points of your body, it really adds on to that immersion experience. And it's interesting that you brought up B haptics. They also have this it's kind of this thing that you attach to your headset, and you can sort of like feel, you can actually feel like bullets. If they hit you in the head, you feel like a vibration on your headset, and that really adds on to it as well. In addition to that, they actually have like the hand what's it called? I think it's the wrist. Yeah, it's actually this wristband, a kind of forearm wristband thing that kind of translates the vibrations as well. So if you're firing a pistol compared to a heavier weapon like a machine gun or something, you can sort of feel the different levels of vibrations there, as well as the leg trackers.
That's amazing.
I think what does that mean for the future of VR? I think it's going to be quite exciting when like a few years down the road when manufacturers are able to combine all these different haptic elements into something that's easy to wear and something that you can last all day. I think the issue right now is how is the audience, the size of the audience that has this suit. So right now, just purchasing a VR headset itself is pretty expensive. It's like almost it's a few $100s to $1,000, and I think we have to wait to reach a point where like all these different peripherals become cheaper and more widespread.
How are you specifically finding the 3D rudder? Are you doing well with that as well? Because it's very specific for the PSVR. I think that, like you say, there's a seated experience, and SAIRENTO's got so much movement. I mean, it's crazy how much you move in the game. How are you finding implementing that in particular into your game?
For us, 3D rudder serves as a really good solution to players not being able to walk around in their play area if they are playing on the PS compared to the PC. So what the 3D rudder does, it kind of acts as this kind of a hoverboard. So you can kind of tilt the board. Like if you tilt it forward like this, you kind of move forward. You tilt it to the side, you strafe. So by combining, and if you tilt it like this, you kind of rotate on the spot as well. So by combining like all these different movements, it kind of feels as if you're playing as a cyber ninja on a hoverboard. That's the closest way I can describe it.
That sounds absolutely fantastic.
Hi man, I'm Dee. Nice to meet you.
Hey.
I've been looking at the game all day. It looks absolutely fantastic. I can't wait to play it. I was just wondering how many weapons we've got in the game, like what we can experiment with.
Right off the top of my head, we have about I think about 17-ish weapons. So we've broken down the weapons into different categories. We have melee weapons, we have pistols, we have submachine guns, we have rifles, we have shotguns, and then we have projectile weapons. So there are all sorts of fun stuff that you can play around with. But my personal favorite is this weapon called the Kusarigama. So what it is like, it kind of looks like a kind of like a scythe, a small scythe. You can sort of like fling it, and the blade is attached to a chain which will fly out and strike enemies. So you can sort of like do a helicopter spin and take out everyone around you. Yeah.
Oh man.
Yeah. To add on to that, it's not just the weapons itself, but as I mentioned, there's this relic system. So you can sort of like customize how your weapon works, and as well as the appearance of it. So you can change the colors of it. So as for the relics itself, you can sort of like increase. It does all sorts of cool stuff. The most basic stuff would be increasing the damage, or maybe increasing the range, ammo capacity, or even gives like really cool effects. For example, after doing a jump, you do more damage, or perhaps like doing like it returns health when you hit an enemy, or even like splits up the attack into 3. So there's each weapon can hold up to 3 different relics. So you can play around with like the different combinations and come up with a build that makes sense for you.
Yeah, so we've got plenty of options, and that's what you're saying. We're not going to run out anytime soon.
Hey.
That sounds
that's fantastic. Thank you very much. Are you ready for the mic?
This is not going to work, is it?
It will. You got it.
I got it.
Man.
Whoa.
Hey.
Awesome. Yes, I just wanted to follow on one quick question from VR Realms question earlier, and just in terms of the movement, you're talking about obviously options of click turning and smooth turning and stuff like that. Is there any thoughts on implementing smooth turning as well with a 180 degree kind of snap turn mapped to one of the buttons? Because that usually works really, really well in terms of these games where you've got like high movement and stuff. So smooth turning is pretty much what most of the veteran game players end up wanting to use. But that when you've got to kind of turn around with the PSVR as well, that 180 degree kind of helps.
Yeah, we do have smooth rotation, and you can kind of change the speed of the rotation. So, some players may prefer to turn like slower than others. So I think we have like 4 different options for the turning speeds. Right off the top of my head, I can't remember if we actually support the 180, the snap turning together with the smooth rotation. But let me check on that, and I'll ensure that it's in the game.
Perfect, brilliant.
Oh man, thank you.
That's amazing.
I'll ensure that's in the game.
Yeah.
It's on the PC
Can we also include
side,
rocket
but
launchers?
It's maybe...
and I just wanted to, another question I was going to ask is more, maybe not so much a question, but there's obviously a few different game modes on the PC VR. I was wondering if you could just give a quick run through of the various game modes that are going to be available in the PSVR, like as in campaign co-op and that sort of thing.
Okay, so we have the campaign mode. And that takes you through 10 levels of the storyline. And beyond that, we kind of see the gameplay being more on the end game. So the end game will consist of this thing called the missions mode. So for missions, it's separated into individual missions and this thing called operation. So an operation will be we kind of like generate 3 different missions at once, and you kind of have to play through all of them to get the final reward. And each of these missions, the area that it takes place in is randomly generated, as well as things like the enemies you find there and the kind of challenges that you face. So how it works is that for each one of these missions, we have this thing called map modifiers. So a modifier could be something like you encounter 50% more enemies, you take 30% more damage, or you encounter more of this enemy type. So it can hold up to 6 of these different challenges, and for every challenge that you add in, it kind of adds on to the amount of loot that you would get. So it's kind of like a risk reward kind of thing. We want you to challenge yourself, to really push yourself to be able to get better rewards. And if you're even, if you're super hardcore, you can go all the way. You can play on the Shinobi difficulty. So that's like a difficulty mode where you only have like 1 life. And you can't, you can't get hit.
Oh, 1 life. That's deep.
Right. So I think, So I think that ties in really well to our acceleration system. Is the slow-mo system. We call it acceleration. So being able to use that system to keep yourself alive, I think it's really accelerating the experience. It's very visceral, knowing that you can't get hit and having the odds stacked against you. Sorry, so I digress. But that's actually the end game that we see. So the idea is you replay these operations and missions. You get better loot. You're able to upgrade yourself. We also have a skill system. So for every level that you get, you gain a skill point, and that skill point can be invested into the skill tree. And there's different tiers of relics that you can find. The common ones are really simple. It goes all the way from common, uncommon, rare, and legendaries. So legendary relics have the potential to actually change the way your game feels entirely. For example, we have this one that lets you split out your blade waves into 3. So a blade wave is this ability where you can sort of charge up your sword, and as you swing it, it releases like this wave of energy. And what the relic does is to turn that blade of energy into 3 blades of energies, which is pretty cool. Oh, we also have like this mode called the Endurance and Gauntlet. So just to give you a quick rundown, Endurance is kind of like a endless survival mode. Is to, if you have like 15 minutes or half an hour of free time to spare, you can just give a go at it. And what happens is that enemies grow in difficulty for every minute that passes. So it's kind of like a challenge that is insurmountable, so to speak. And then Gauntlet is kind of a different take on that. It sends you through a room after room of enemies in an endless fashion. And in the same concept, the enemies in the room grow more difficult and challenging with each room that you clear. So it's kind of like an endless challenge as well.
Sounds amazing. Sounds like an endless loop of awesome fun to keep on grinding and get those better weapons.
That'd be one.
It had to be me involved.
It's going to be gone, dude. It's going to be gone.
Quality.
Quality.
Pleasure to meet you, Recon VR here. I was going to ask about the co-op. How will that work? Is it a separate mode, or will you go through the entire single player together?
Okay, so right now the co-op mode only applies to the missions. For the actual campaign itself, it's kind of meant to be a very singular experience that tells the story of the protagonist. So the co-op will take place for it kind of takes place after the main storyline. I don't want to go into any spoilers there, but yeah.
Dual wielding, what combination of weapons can you have? Is it literally anything you want in each hand?
Right, great question. So for our weapons, we kind of categorize them into one-handed weapons and two-handed weapons. So for example, a bow, you have to use a bow two-handed. For a sword, you can use it one-handed. So you could kind of pair that with another one-handed weapon. You could have a pistol and a sword, or you could have two swords. You could have two guns. As long as the weapon that you want to wield is one-handed, and both one-handed, it's fine.
I couldn't pull the bow with my teeth.
So on the
maybe in the sequel. Maybe in the sequel.
New peripherals.
So there's a sequel. Good to know. Thank you. The game looks amazing. It's one of those games you would buy VR for, in my opinion. Incredible.
Beautiful.
There you go. Thank you.
So Chalit, just to touch back on the weapons, have you got like projectile weapons, as in shurikens and that as well?
Yeah, we absolutely do. We even have this thing called we call it the glaive. It's this like giant circular disc, a metal disc that you can kind of throw, and it lops off enemies' limbs or heads, and then it comes back to you. If it hits something in the distance, like the environment or something, it might lose its velocity, but you can always call it back by pressing down the trigger.
Oh, nice.
So it will always come back to you.
Beautiful.
Nice.
And just to mention, there's this relic that allows it to sort of like rebound against any nearby enemies. So if you fling it at someone, it kind of like bounces, I think like 7 times or so to like nearby enemies, and then comes back to you. So that's pretty cool.
Hello, my name's LSB. For one, I just wanted to thank you personally from the deepest bottom of my heart for bringing Sorento to PSVR.
Love is in the air, everywhere I look around.
Games like Raw Data are the reason why I started playing VR to begin with. It was really what sold me on VR, is the action game experience. I think Sorento is definitely like one of those games that kind of puts that action front and center. One of my biggest questions, since most of the other ones have been already, is about frames per second. You have so many, a myriad of options pertaining to the PC VR version. And one of the options is to play it at 30 frames per second or 60 frames per second. And I was wondering exactly what frames per second you guys were aiming for with the PSVR version of the game.
We kind of have to hit a minimum frame rate requirement, which is around 60. So if the game drops below that, they simply will not allow the game to go through. So it's actually one of the tougher things that we have to do to port the game over. We kind of have to look over all our graphics and kind of really squeeze out every last drop we have for the frame rate. So
right,
no worries about that.
Well, yeah, with the action game experience, especially with games like Sorento, your 60 frames per second is like the minimum you want to have. So that's really great to know. I just have one other question. Do you guys have a firm release date for Sorento on PSVR?
Right. So we're still in the middle of the consultation process. So the final date is still a bit hazy, but we are looking at least internally, but trying to get it out by the end of February or sometime in March.
Wow.
But definitely, definitely around the second quarter, latest.
Beautiful. Thank you, Chalit. I appreciate you answering all of our questions.
Oh,
Can't wait for
beautiful.
Sorento.
No problem.
I've just literally looked at my phone, right? And Taz is like, "Oh, GT, can you ask this last question?" So I'm going to ask this for Taz. So this is hot on the press, from New Zealand. So I'll read it from my phone actually because it's right in front of me. So what he's asking about, he's actually intrigued about the enemies and the enemy types. He named them, again, my phone's off. I could wave it to you, but you wouldn't be able to see that, it's in VR. So yeah, like he's asking about what type of enemies are, and he's intrigued in how that would add to the story and that sort of thing.
Right, so I could go over like some of the enemies that we have. So one of the more common enemies that you encounter, we call him the Bushi. He's basically this big samurai guy with a blade, and he charges at you and attempts to like hack you up. He's sort of like simpler to deal with. But he does have this defensive maneuver where he can sort of like reflect bullets back at you or kind of block your attacks. So what role this enemy serves is to kind of get you to approach him from different angles, because he's vulnerable from the sides or the back. So we kind of want to, as in all the enemies that we put in, we kind of want to emphasize on the locomotion abilities that you have. So it's always about trying to get you to sort of like jump over them, jump at them in the air, or sort of like teleport behind them to kind of like do the final slash or to get past their defenses. And one of the enemies that we have that is a more dangerous one is the sumo. And the sumo can sort of like charge and run you down from a distance. And that also ties into, kind of E-Honda, yeah.
That sounds amazing.
So again, it goes back to the concept of having you use your abilities to sort of like jump over him to avoid getting hit and kind of focus on the weak point on his back. So that's generally our kind of our development manifesto when it comes to creating enemies.
Is there any boss battles?
We do have boss battles in the form of this enemy called the Daimyo. So he's this even bigger dude. He has like rocket launchers. He has like he can throw out blade waves at you. He has this giant chain gun. He also has this I would call it like a particle cannon that can sort of like snipe you from a distance. So he has all sorts of different abilities that kind of make it really dangerous to face off against him. Sure.
You mentioned sort of Shinobi. There's a lot of ninja games that have happened in the past, like Ninja Gaiden and that sort of thing. And it kind of seems like that's the. But yeah, I just wondered what your sort of influences were, from sort of retro, sort of perspective, sort of thing.
All right. So I think one of the biggest influences would be Max Payne. It's this right. So it's kind of like this game that involves a lot of shoot dodging and like bullet dives, and the whole concept of being able to sort of like control time to some extent, to be able to use it as a weapon against your enemies, weaponizing time essentially, is a really cool concept, and that was something we wanted to try and bring into SAIRENTO VR, but we wanted to make it different in the sense that it's an ability that you are always able to kind of pull off. Because a lot of games, they kind of limit your abilities to cooldown timers or things like that. But we kind of went the opposite direction, and we kind of let you use that ability freely and at will. Although there is still a resource management element where you can't like keep using the ability too many times in one at a time. So I think by default you can sort of pull off that ability 3 times in a row for about like 9-ish seconds of slow mo. So that's a fairly extensive period of slow mo. But the idea is that we wanted to make you feel like a badass and to empower you to take on the challenges ahead. So in the same way, we kind of designed the enemies and the gameplay to be a bit more challenging, in a way that you kind of have to use your slow-mo abilities to survive, rather than a kind of like a function that you would use if you wanted to.
Thanks, Chalit, for answering the questions, and I'll pass you on to Chalit.
I was going to say I've completed Max Payne about 20 times. I love
it's a great
Max
game.
Oh, it's amazing, dude. I love it.
Max Payne for the win.
Greetings again. the endless and gauntlet mode, is there going to be a score on those, or is it just for fun?
A scoreboard.
Right now, we don't have a scoreboard for that. It's kind of a local scoreboard. It kind of shows you your best time or the number of minutes you've survived. But there isn't an online leaderboard for that.
Right.
There is not.
I think he's asking, can you do an online leaderboard? I think. I'm not sure.
Yes, can we please
It's
have an
kind of
online
his
leaderboard?
thing.
I'll look into that.
Sharon doesn't need any more leaderboards to be at the top of.
I just want to go back to some of the controls. Obviously, we've mentioned the 3D rudder. I use one of them on the PC a lot. From my understanding is, when it comes to the PSVR side, it's all really down to you and the development team to make sure that that's all working. From speaking to Nicholas from over there. So I'm just wondering, like, did doing it on the PC help with the mapping process for the PSVR? Because obviously there's different, like, I believe on the PC it's set for like QWERTY keyboard type thing for the movement.
Yeah, definitely. There are a lot of parallels within the PC version and the 3D rudder that we're trying to implement. I mean, essentially both work on a kind of WASD control scheme. So essentially it's about porting over that functionality and kind of packaging it in a way that makes sense for the PlayStation. Yes.
Nice.
That's great, thank you.
Hi, one is actually about how the development process from Sony, if any of the optimization you're doing there is actually going to influence back into the PC side and actually help further optimize the performance on the PC side as well.
Yeah, definitely. We've actually learned a lot of things trying to port SAIRENTO over to the PlayStation. And whatever knowledge that we've learned is something that we will bring back to the original SAIRENTO. And it will also help us with future titles as well.
Live for the mixed reality?
Yes. Yes.
With their recent update, it kind of broke the Live support.
Yeah, so we actually, also in terms of our development process, the PlayStation and the PC team are actually two separate entities. So we'll definitely be looking at that as well while we are porting over PlayStation.
Oh, that'd be great, because I'd love to do a mixed reality stream with this, especially with it coming out on PlayStation, because there's going to be nothing better than looking on there and, seeing the swords and everything out in mixed reality, which I think helps sell a lot for it. Right.
So while we're talking about the PC VR and PSVR comparisons, is there any differences in content at all between the two?
In terms of content, we've tried to keep everything on par with each other. There are definitely some minor differences in terms of how the levels look, for instance. We've also done some optimization in terms of removing certain problematic elements. But in general, we've tried to keep both versions on par.
How much the game will cost at launch? I don't know if you can discuss that now or not.
We are looking at a price of around $39 at the moment. That's $39, yes.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll definitely be buying it. There looks so much stuff to do in there. We've definitely got a sale from me anyway. Cool.
Super.
You ready for mine?
Yeah. Yes, obviously you're coming to a close with SAIRENTO for PSVR. So are you as a studio looking to develop more games for VR, specifically PSVR is obviously more what I'm interested in. And if so, have you kind of got any information about that at this point, or any kind of areas you're trying to look into? Is it going to be more action-packed, or are you trying to look into different areas of VR?
Good question. So what I can tell you is we currently right now what we have on our hands is the SAIRENTO for PlayStation. Of course, we'll still be updating SAIRENTO for the PC. We're also looking at porting SAIRENTO to the Oculus Quest, which is coming out soonish.
I was going to ask about that.
We are also looking at a PC title. It's kind of like a roguelike card game. I know it's not a VR game, but the idea is that we definitely want to continue with VR games. That's a given. We definitely want to work on, a sequel to SAIRENTO if possible. But the idea is that we build up our war chest first with with a PC game, a non-VR game, and then we go back to making an even bigger, even more amazing VR experience. Plus, you know the VR market is kind of pretty. I wouldn't say it's easy to develop for the VR market, and there are a lot of risk involved. So as much as we would like to jump straight into a sequel for SAIRENTO, we kind of have to ensure that we don't find out that we run out of money halfway and we're unable to continue with our next project.
Awesome. No, that sounds like amazing news. Yeah, thank you very much. Good luck with that.
Also, Chalit, I want to touch on, I believe you can find SAIRENTO VR in the arcades. Is that correct?
That is correct. We do license out the game to several arcades.
Yeah? Okay. Does that bring in some revenue for yourself?
It brings in a small amount, and it's always nice to hear from fellow VR enthusiasts in the industry. They kind of keep it close with us to let us know, what exactly players in the VR arcades are looking for. And we kind of take that as another channel of feedback for us on how to improve the game, especially for, as you know, like players who go to VR arcades, they're kind of more newish to VR. So we kind of get a different viewpoint on how to make the game more suitable for the more casual players.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, I've never been to a VR arcade. I know Khan has been to a VR arcade. I'm assuming, has anyone else been?
Yeah, I've been to VR Zone in Tokyo.
Right, cool.
Wow.
And so Rakan, you played Mario Kart, but you said you couldn't see anything for like 7 minutes.
Pretty much. They used I want to say it was the Vive headset, and because I wear glasses, I couldn't wear them.
It is the Vive. You have to put the glasses in first.
Yeah, no, that didn't work. I had to take them out. They were bent.
Oh, wow.
But no, I did enjoy it. I did enjoy the experience, obviously.
Superb.
And then the other game that was there, it was some hospital horror game I did. Well, I think what it was. I haven't seen it out on anything.
Nice.
So you're referring to the VR zone in Shinjuku, right?
Oh, no, that wasn't me. I went to London.
I've been there as well. It was quite an interesting experience.
Fantastic place.
How you doing, Chalit? Most of these guys have already asked about just about every question there is, left to ask. I just found it really interesting that raw data was such a huge influence on this game because it's really like one of my favorite PlayStation VR games. What exactly do you think of Servios and like what they're doing in the VR space? They're obviously one of my favorite developers in VR.
So in terms of Servios as a company, we don't really know them like on a first person basis, but we played their games and we think that they're doing some really good work in the VR space, especially for raw data, which you mentioned is one of your favorite games. It actually served as a really good example of what an action-based VR game could look like. And the idea is that we wanted to take that idea and turn it up to 11. We want to see how crazy we could go with the whole physical motion thing. So as you can see, we kind of built on what raw data has. For example, in raw data, I believe there's this sort of like translation, kind of like teleportation motion, right? A logical addition to that would be adding the ability to jump. Because for us, when we saw the arc, when you kind of like project the movement arc in raw data, we're kind of thinking, what would happen if, the player actually followed that movement arc? And that kind of gave rise to the idea of jumping in SAIRENTO. And then, in addition to that, would be, we were thinking, what would happen if we pointed this arc at a wall? And that is how wall running came into the game. Mm-hmm. And then, it sort of like progressively got crazier from there. And we kind of followed this rule of cool. So if it sounds cool, it's definitely going to make it into the game.
The rule of cool.
Right. So when you
on the box.
Right. So if you hear the word,
really cool.
Yeah. So if you hear the word somersault, that's pretty cool, right? So that's definitely something we're going to add into the game anyways. Like even if the whole idea was like crazy and like people would say, don't put it in, it's going to make people dizzy. But the thing is that VR is such a subjective experience. You can have like 10 people in a room and you would have like 11 opinions on what is right. So the idea is that we don't want to cut off any mechanics just because we think that a subset of the audience will not be able to enjoy it. For us, the answer would be to make it an option. So if you're able to handle this kind of locomotion method, by all means, turn it on and enjoy it.
I love it. Thank you for the answer. I got just one more thing to add. Take my money. It's all yours.
So on touching on that, LSB, I believe you're also getting a physical release via Perp Games. Is that correct?
Oh.
That is correct. Yes.
Wow.
The actual release date will be a bit later. It won't be on the exact same date as we release for the digital version. It will be sometime after that. But yes, we are looking at a physical release.
Superb. What do you think of that?
I might have sold out for the physical.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I mean, and you can also, I don't know if they're taking pre-orders, but if you check out Perp Games website, they got so many physical games now. They're really, really pushing that. And to hear that your game is joining that catalogue is absolutely fantastic. I'd love to have your game as a physical copy. Is there any PlayStation Pro features for this game?
The thing is, we just got our PS Pro set, so we are definitely looking at what additional graphic features we can put in, or at least the idea is that we had to downgrade the graphics a little to get it to work on the PlayStation. So now we're seeing if we can like keep some of that extra glitter, that make it look a bit better on the PS Pro.
Nice.
The frame rate is definitely better, for sure.
The frame rate will be improved on the PS4 Pro.
Oh no.
Definitely, yeah.
Cool.
I'm not sure if you guys have heard of it, but there's also this nose attachment that lets you smell like the blood of enemies.
Yeah, we've seen it.
The blood of enemies.
There was a Resident
I've actually gotten the chance to try it in Tokyo. I went to the Tokyo Game Show and we were actually with the company that designed it. I think it's called Vaxo. So basically, it's this thing that you kind of paste it onto the bottom of your headset.
Yeah.
And it feedbacks the smell to you. Like, it kind of triggers when you call the code for it. Like if you.
Oh wow.
I mean, I think we had like scents for blood, gunpowder, and a scented flower kind of smell.
Wow.
Yeah, for like
blossom.
Like the geisha.
That actually smell like blood.
So you're gonna have cherry blossoms and blood.
Yeah, blood smell.
Yeah.
What is
but,
this?
I think one of the problems is that you kind of get pretty nauseous if you keep smelling the same thing for a long time, which is like the smell of blood. So some of our players at the show, they kind of like they couldn't take it and they had to take off the headset.
Oh man, I'd love to be in Firewall
crazy.
and go into the kitchen with the bagels and walk in there and go, I can smell bagels.
Every match would end with everyone just standing around there.
But the thing is, the scents are pretty expensive, and you kind of have to purchase them individually. So I think like one capsule costs like $70.
How much?
And
Sorry,
the device
how
itself,
much?
Right? Yeah.
How much?
$70. 70 for 1 cent. One specific scent. So there's some logistic issues with actually purchasing this device.
And how long can you use that one capsule for?
Well, they say it lasts for 1 month.
1 month.
Yeah.
But it's the first. It's the first. Yeah. It's the start.
First iteration.
Yeah. It's the NES version of the
NES version. I like that. That's a good one.
Yeah, excellent. So, thank you very much, Chalit, for joining. That is.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's a real honour, man. Thank you, and thank you everyone for being here.
Yeah, it was great being here.
Yeah, great interview.
Yeah, man. Well done.
It's that time.